The smell of boiled moss made Joel Harker's stomach curl, but he kept his face blank. Cadets from 6 different star systems crouched in a semicircle around the simmering pot, steam rising like guilt into the cold Threxus 9 air. Instructor Thrall, towering and chitin-armored, paced behind them with the self-assurance of someone absolutely certain of his intellectual superiority and utterly unimpressed by the lone human in the group. "You see," Thrall said, gesturing with a claw toward the bubbling vat, "this is food. Sustenance. What evolved species consume for strength, clarity, and communal harmony." He paused, swiveling his head toward Joel. "Not whatever your species gnaws off bones in the dark." A ripple of laughter passed through the group, trilling, hissing, a few stomach-churning clicks. Joel didn't smile. He watched the instructor, waiting, filing the words away with the same quiet focus he used to track game back on Earth. Thrall mistook his silence for embarrassment. "You claim carnivory," he said mockingly. "But your species has molars, your stomach is weak, your hands are soft. You are not predators, you are opportunists." Joel stirred the moss stew with a stick and said nothing. Not yet. 2 days earlier, Joel had stepped off the drop shuttle into Threxus 9's Highland air, biting cold and thin enough to sting the back of his throat. The survival course had been optional. Technically, Command back at Ganymede Orbital had framed it as career building. A real opportunity, Harker. Just 5 weeks with the best of the best. 1 instructor, 20 cadets, 19 of them aliens. 1 human. "No one's made it past week 3 without a med-evac," the shuttle pilot had warned him, tightening the strap on Joel's duffel. "Keep your emergency beacon close." The landscape reminded him of Iceland if it had been chewed by glaciers and then dusted in silver lichen, black cliffs, ice winds, and flat gray skies. No sound but the low thrum of geothermal vents. Perfect place to go hungry. The camp itself was minimalist. Individual thermal pods arranged around a communal fire pit, with a command tent and a Thrall's massive supply crate squatting like a sarcophagus. Joel spent the first night double-checking his gear. No outside food allowed. 1 personal item, 1 knife. No weapons, no transcoms. He'd brought a photo of his little sister back home and an Earth-issued multi-tool with a blunt blade that was more symbolic than practical. The next morning, they began. Days passed in a blur of lectures, biome simulations, and forced marches. Thrall barked orders and made thinly veiled jabs at the various species he deemed inefficient. Joel noticed the instructor never actually demonstrated anything himself. He observed, commented, and occasionally sneered. The first week focused on basics: constructing thermally insulated shelters from local stone and compressed moss, identifying edible fungi, boiling water with heated rocks. Joel followed directions to the letter, said little, and stayed near the edges of the group. The others were friendlier among themselves. 2 Felid-like warriors from the Kelkai domain shared dry jokes in their guttural dialect. A trio of feathered Leocrians bonded over water collection strategies. A 6-eyed, gelatinous being called Elu tried to include Joel, but couldn't quite hide its discomfort with the way he watched animals flit through the trees. They all thought he was slow, soft, carnivorous in theory, perhaps, but basically civilized. The Ral certainly thought so. During a lecture on comparative digestive systems, the instructor pulled up a holograph of human anatomy and tilted his massive head. "This is a stomach," he announced. "Acidic, yes. Adaptable, arguably, but structurally unimpressive. A true predator digests muscle, bone, even chitin. Your species," he turned to Joel, "uses cutlery." Laughter again. A Talvoran cadet nearby, serpentine and iridescent, offered Joel a root chip with a wink. Joel took it and chewed silently. It tasted like cardboard soaked in celery water. The lectures were interesting in their own way. Joel scribbled notes fast and hard. Not because he wanted to prove anything, but because if he didn't know what the others could or couldn't eat, they might not survive long out here. And he already had the sense they'd need help. The ion storm hit on day 13. No warning. 1 minute the skies were clear. The next they were split by horizontal forks of pale lightning and wind, strong enough to throw a full-grown Kelkai off its feet. The resupply drone, due that morning with supplemental food bars, first aid kits, and heat packs, vanished off the tracker. The emergency beacon pinged once, then flatlined. Storm front interference. Thrall growled, squinting at the broken cloud line. Unavoidable. Local fauna may become agitated. Stay in triads. Collect from mapped sectors only. Sir, how long before the next drone? Asked a feathered cadet named Shren, voice pitched with worry. Thrall stared at the cadet without blinking. 4 days minimum, 6 if the storm persists. The next 4 days felt like 2 weeks. Day 14. They foraged for bark scrapings, fermented root bulbs, and stringy moss. Joel chewed what he could, supplementing with the last half of his high-density ration bar. At night, the temperatures plunged to sub-zero. Cadets curled in blankets, shivering, some of them too weak to leave their pods the next morning. Day 15. The group's energy began to flag. One of the Leocrians collapsed mid-hike. Joel caught her before she hit the rocks. Her skin felt like damp paper. She was breathing, barely. Thrall ordered a temporary halt. More bark, less talking. Joel didn't argue, but that night, he lay awake in his pod, every nerve alert. His muscles ached, not from exertion, but from the creeping fatigue of protein deficiency. He'd spent a year training in survival scenarios for Earth's Mars expansion core. Calories weren't just fuel, they were time. And they were out of time. He checked his wristband. No drone, no signal. He looked into the night. Then he slipped out of camp. He returned 4 hours later, dragging something long and wrapped in shredded bark. It looked like nothing native to Earth. Long limbs, membranous wings, fur like soaked velvet. The eyes were already closed. Joel had snapped its neck after baiting it into a pit trap with a decoy fire. He said nothing, just built a small fire pit off to the side of the main camp. Some cadets stared. Thrall glowered but didn't move. Joel cleaned the carcass with his multi-tool clumsy work, but practiced. He skinned the glider beast, gutted it, wrapped strips of meat in moss, and set them to slow roast on sharpened sticks over heated rocks. The fat crackled. The air filled with a scent no translator could quite pin down. One cadet gagged and retched behind a boulder. Another stood with his arms crossed, watching silently. Eluit drifted closer, eyes wide, pulsing gently in the low light. Joel sat cross-legged and began to eat. Slowly, deliberately, stripping the meat from the bones, biting down, chewing with focus and method. When he was done, he licked his fingers clean, then the bones. No show, no grin, just survival. Local glider beast, he muttered, without looking up. Lean meat, high protein, fire roasted with moss for salt. No one spoke. Thrall said nothing. But his eyes didn't leave the bones. By morning, the smell still lingered, meat and smoke, and something deeper, animal, primitive. It clung to the stones and drifted through the cadet pods like an unwelcome memory. No one mentioned it at first. Breakfast was bark pulp and boiled lichen, served lukewarm. Several cadets picked at their portions. Shren, the Lecrian who'd collapsed the day before, sat upright but hollow-eyed, her feathers dull and slack. Joel noticed her hands tremble slightly as she tried to lift her tin cup. Across the camp, one of the Kelkai, the taller one, Jarok, stood motionless, his feline eyes fixed on Joel. Instructor Thrall was late. When he finally appeared, his expression was unreadable. Though his gaze briefly swept the remains of the fire pit Joel had used, the charred sticks were gone. Joel had buried the bones, out of respect for the more herbivorous cadets, but the scent had done its damage. Perceptions had shifted. "You will spend the next 48 hours in Zone 9, Thrall announced, his voice brittle with morning cold. Mountain base, wind corridor, coldest sector. A few cadets groaned softly. Shren coughed and wrapped her arms tighter around herself. There will be no guide rotation, Thrall continued. Each team is responsible for its own shelter and food sourcing. Your cohesion will be evaluated. He turned, claws tapping against his data pad. Harker. Joel looked up, already knowing. You'll lead Group 3. Zone 9 was worse than it sounded. The ground sloped unevenly toward a craggy drop-off, and the wind was constant, never shrieking, but always whispering through the rocks like breath across a rifle barrel. Joel's group consisted of Jarok, Shren, and a sluggish Yern cadet named Volk, who was losing color rapidly beneath his pebbled skin. Volk was normally chatty. Now he barely spoke a word as they hiked toward their marked grid. Joel kept the pace slow, calculated, his breath fogged in front of him with every step. Shren stumbled once, and Jarak caught her. They reached the grid by late morning. Joel immediately began laying out a lean-to-shelter against the rock face, using the same taut moss lattice method Thrall had taught them in week 1, but added extra insulation using dried bark. He nodded toward Jarak. "Help me trench around the fire pit. This spot gets runoff." Jarak narrowed his eyes, but followed. "You didn't offer anyone meat," the Kelkai said after a moment. Not accusatory, just stating. Joel paused. "I didn't know how anyone would react. Figured it'd make things worse." "You hunted well, clean. You kept the organs intact." Joel glanced at him. "You hunt?" "Used to, before conscription." They said nothing for a while after that, but Jarak's posture eased slightly, and he worked faster. By afternoon, the shelter was up. Volk was already inside, half asleep, conserving heat. Shren crouched by the fire pit, shivering, until Joel handed her a boiled root. She took it, but her eyes flicked toward him. "I know what I smelled," she said quietly. Joel didn't reply. "You use thermal rocks, and moss to flavor." "I needed protein," he said. "So do you." "I'm not built for that," she said. "My gut would—" "Not meat, fat." She blinked. "I rendered some," Joel added, "in a wrap. You rub it on your inner joints and upper spine, helps insulate. You'll lose less heat through circulation." Shren stared at him, then slowly nodded. "I'll try." That night, the wind rose. Volk didn't eat. Joel took note of his pale skin tone and the slight tremor in his lower limbs. Mild hypoglycemia. Nothing immediate, but worsening. There was no chance of a drone until after the storm cleared. By the time they returned to base camp, 3 cadets had dropped out from other teams, med-evac'd by sled transport. Volk stayed upright, barely, but he leaned heavily on Joel during the final descent. Thrall met them at the checkpoint. His gaze flicked from the hunched cadets to Joel, who stood tall but sunburned across his cheekbones, his boots caked in dried mud. "You held formation," Thrall noted without praise. "No one fell behind," Joel said simply. A pause. Then Thrall stepped closer, antennae twitching slightly. "You have knowledge of wild preparation beyond human protocol. Earth-based survival course. Pre-Mars deployment. Also, I camp." "You camp?" "Back home, for fun." Thrall made a sound low, dry, somewhere between disbelief and a scoff, and turned away. By day 18, the shift was undeniable. A quiet ripple passed through the camp. Joel woke one morning to find 3 cadets waiting outside his pod, shifting awkwardly. "We want to observe," said one, a short quadrupedal species with a wide tongue and fast metabolism. "Just see how you did it." "I'm not feeding everyone," Joel replied, pulling on his thermal jacket. No, the cadet said quickly. "Just teach us, please." Joel nodded once. "You bring your own tools. I show you once. Then it's on you." The next few days felt surreal. Joel taught a crash course in snare traps, deadfall rigs, and bait lure setups using scent-rich moss and animal droppings. He demonstrated how to test a carcass for parasites using flame and muscle tension, and how to separate edible organ meat from waste. He made a tripod rotisserie from bent saplings. He carved rough skewers from bark layers. He demonstrated how to render fat for use as heat insulation or emergency fuel. He never glorified it, he just showed what worked. By day 20, small fires dotted the far side of camp. The smell returned, this time slightly different, some overcooked, some burned, but it meant one thing: they were adapting. Even Thrall attended a session. He didn't interrupt, just stood behind a boulder and watched as Joel cleaned a snared ridge rabbit. Joel didn't acknowledge him, but deliberately slowed his movements, explaining each cut for the watching cadets. Thrall stayed until the meat sizzled on the coals, then walked away without a word. That night, Volk came to Joel with shaky steps. "I want to try," he said. Joel eyed him. "You're not strong enough for trap work." "I can still eat." Joel hesitated, then handed over a strip of dried meat he'd kept wrapped in woven reed. "Chew slow," he said. "Start with a quarter. Your gut isn't used to protein fermentation." Volk nodded, took it, and walked away with both hands cradling the morsel like a treasure. By the final week, the transformation was complete. Cadets who could barely stand days earlier were out setting traps with caution and curiosity. One group developed a method of fireless cooking using heat vents and enclosed rock boxes. A Kelkai team added herbs to reduce gaminess. Jarok brought Joel a sample. "Needs salt," Joel said, "but you're getting there." Even Shren, who had dry heaved at the first scent of roasted meat, now carried a pouch of rendered fat she used to line her gloves. "Still can't eat it," she admitted, "but I can't argue with the results." Thrall began recording the sessions. At first, he used his standard field lens, hovering silently. But later, he asked Joel direct questions. "What did you do with the glider beast wing membranes?" "Dried them. They work like jerky, high in collagen." "And the bone marrow?" "Cracked with stones, boiled, makes good broth." "And the brain?" Joel glanced at him. "Burned it, too risky with unknown prion analogs." Thrall's antennae curled slightly. "Caution," he muttered. "Unexpected." Joel didn't smile. By day 28, camp reports showed a 60% improvement in resting energy levels and thermoregulation. 3 cadets were able to come off protein gels thanks to adapted diets. No further medevacs had been requested. The course was ending in 5 days. Survival had become second nature. But no one forgot the night the human licked the bones clean by firelight. Joel woke with a familiar ache in his shoulders. Not injury, just the slow fatigue that came with sleeping in a rock-lined pod that retained barely enough heat to keep frost from forming on his boots. He rolled his shoulder, sat up, and listened. The camp was no longer quiet. Not like before, when whispers of wind and thin coughs dominated the mornings. Now, there was activity, controlled movement, muted voices. He stepped outside into the frostbitten dawn and took in the change. A cadet he didn't recognize by name was turning a skinned ridge hopper on a spit over a smokeless vent. 2 Kelkai were skinning a second one nearby, working without being told. Across the clearing, Volk sat hunched beside a shallow boiling pit, steam rising as he added bone fragments with steady hands. His color had returned, albeit slowly. He still walked with a limp and tired easily, but he was alert again. Thrall was nowhere to be seen. Joel crouched by the communal ash bed and began prepping his own cook for the day. He'd brought back a glider kit the night before, a smaller cousin of the first one he'd eaten. He had it skinned and quartered in under 10 minutes. Routine now? The outer muscle tissue was lean, but the legs had thick tendons full of useful protein. The kidneys he removed and buried. The liver he kept. It would keep his iron up. He was slicing the flank meat when Thrall appeared at the edge of camp. No dramatic entrance, no booming voice, just a steady walk, datapad in one claw, a coil of something metallic hanging from his shoulder. He stopped beside Joel's station. "I've reviewed the thermograph data," he said without greeting. Joel didn't look up. "And average body temperatures among cadets have stabilized within 3% of baseline. Nutritional stress markers have decreased by 41%. Coordinated metabolic output has increased." "Sounds promising." Thrall watched him slice. "I have never recorded such a rapid reversal of multi-species physiological decline without external supplies or medical intervention." Joel nodded once, tossing meat into a pouch lined with dried moss. "Adapt or die," he said simply. Thrall didn't respond at first. Then, "I would like to observe your rendering process more closely today, with recording." "Sure. Just don't touch anything raw." Thrall's mandibles know, face twitched. "Understood." That afternoon, Joel held an open session. By now, cadets expected it. There was no formal announcement, just the human crouched over a vent stone with a carcass and a calm voice, explaining the next part of the puzzle. "The trick with fat is heat control," he said, stirring chunks of white tissue in a bark-lined bowl suspended above hot rocks. "Too much, and it scorches. Not enough, and it gels without fully separating." Eluut, the gelatinous cadet, pulsed with interest. "And the rendered product? What do you do with it?" "Storage, fuel, skin protection. You can even burn it in a hollowed shell if you need light. Or heat." Joel held up a dried rind filled with solidified grease. Burns longer than moss, doesn't reek as bad. Thrall filmed from a crouch, for once lowering himself to eye level with the cadets. He didn't speak, but his antennae twitched rapidly every time Joel gave a measurement or demonstrated a technique. At one point, he even asked Joel to hold a segment of marrowbone near a thermal sensor for data calibration. Joel obliged without comment. Shren sat to one side, chewing a moss-wrapped root while scribbling notes. Jarok was busy shaping bones into rough needles. A few of the others, including the tongue-heavy quadruped, practiced basic netting knots using braided tendons. It looked nothing like the first week. The atmosphere had shifted from survival to something approaching community. Still, Joel wasn't smiling. That night, as the cadets huddled near a large fire pit ringed with heated stones, Jarok nudged Joel with his shoulder. "We're calling you Bonefire now," he said dryly, "because of that first night. You and your little feast." Joel snorted. "Catchy. You've saved half this camp." Joel shook his head. "I just didn't want to starve." Jarok studied him a moment. "Back home, you would have made a good predator." "Back home, I just like grilled steak," Joel replied. Jarok let out a low huff close to a laugh. Then he reached into a pouch and handed Joel a narrow strip of cleaned hide, twisted into a braided loop. "It's from the first glider I caught," he said. "It's strong, should hold a blade." Joel nodded, fingers closing around the loop. "Thanks." Then his fingers stilled. "Wait, how did you—" Jarok tilted his head. "You buried the bones, but not all of them." Joel blinked, then laughed once, shaking his head. Day 30 arrived with a surprise. At midday, a low drone buzz echoed from the sky. The storm front had finally cleared. The resupply drone was inbound. It dropped rations, medkits, heat packs, and protein tubes. No one touched them immediately. Volk wrinkled his nose at the scent of a ration bar. "This used to be food?" Joel gave a quiet laugh. "Technically. Shren peeled one open anyway. I'm eating mine. I want to remember what cardboard tastes like." Joel opened his pack too, but only to store the supplies. Habit now. The processed taste would hit hard after clean meat and natural fat. Thrall didn't say anything about the drone. He was too busy finalizing his field report replete with images, cadet biometrics, and Joel's methods broken down into a 12-step field guide. The name of the module? Human Predatory Strategies and Culinary Practices. Graduation came on day 35. The survival course ended not with ceremony, but with order. Each cadet lined up to receive their field patch, silver, threaded and heat-proof, stitched with the course crest and completion marker. For most, it was a symbol of endurance. For Joel, it was a curiosity. He hadn't come for prestige. But he'd leave with something more useful. The cadets milled about, taking slow goodbyes. Joel said little, as usual, but accepted a rough, hammered fire striker from one team, a pouch of dried herbs from another. Shren gave him a drawing, charcoal and lichen pigment, showing the campfire with cadets seated around it, Joel barely more than a silhouette. He tucked it away carefully. Thrall approached last. The instructor didn't speak for a long moment. He just stood before Joel, holding a bundle wrapped in oiled hide. Joel raised an eyebrow. Thrall finally said, "Your methods will be taught next cycle, as standard practice." "Surprised?" Joel asked. Thrall tilted his head. "I am adjusted, not surprised." He extended the bundle. Joel took it and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a bone knife, not decorative, not ceremonial, practical. The handle was wrapped in cured tendon. The edge was honed sharp. It had clearly been carved from a glider beast femur, polished to near ivory sheen. Along the side, etched in alien script, was a short line of text. The translator on Joel's wrist hummed softly and rendered it aloud. "Respect earned, not assumed." Joel turned the blade once in his hand, weighing it. "Appreciate it," he said. "I'll try not to eat the dignitaries at the next summit." Thrall's face made no expression, but his antennae dipped just slightly. Joel tucked the blade into his belt, shook the instructor's arm once, and turned toward the shuttle pad, where the others were already boarding. As he walked, the wind picked up again, sharp and cold. He inhaled once, long and deep. The air no longer smelled of boiled moss. It smelled of smoke, char, and bone. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Joel Harker smiled. 2 weeks later, Joel Harker stood on a polished platform in the Interstellar Survival Course Central Hall, his uniform crisp, his posture careful. The ceremony hall buzzed with soft chatter, unusual for a room filled with diplomats, trainers, and high-ranking brass. Most of them were staring at him, whispering to their aides, or side-eyeing the bone knife strapped openly to his belt. The inscription had been re-etched in High Common for the benefit of the curious, respect earned, not assumed. At the lectern, Admiral Lokes of the Terran Expansion Authority cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Harker," he began, "completed the Interspecies Advanced Survival Training course on Threxus 9, with no medical evac, no resupply requests, and 0 disciplinary citations." A few heads turned at that last bit. Lokes continued. His field contributions increased survival retention by over 80%, and his wilderness adaptation protocols, specifically those rooted in indigenous Earth predatory behaviors, have now been formally adopted into the updated Galactic Emergency Training Manual. The hall was silent. Joel kept his expression flat. His back still ached from sleeping on stone. A small scab on his thumb hadn't closed yet, old cut from splitting open a joint. The clean scent of cologne and recycled air made him feel strangely hollow, like he'd left the real world behind in the ice and smoke of Threxus 9. Lokes turned to the gathered guests. For reference, Harker's methods include constructing insulated cooking pits, hand-rendering animal fats, and preparing muscle tissue over geothermal vents. At the word muscle tissue, one of the Aurelian delegates paled and subtly turned her seat away. A few chuckles broke through the diplomatic restraint. Joel took the ribbing in stride. He'd never expected to become a cautionary legend. After the ceremony, a quiet reception followed. No drinks, no food, just a sterile meet and greet in the central atrium. Joel mostly stuck to the edge of the room, nursing a water flask and nodding politely when approached. Eluat floated up beside him. "I did not realize," the gelatinous cadet said, "how abnormal your behavior was until I tried to explain it to my sponsor." "Good, abnormal, or bad?" "Yes." Joel smiled. "Glad you made it through. I now understand digestion in an entirely new way." Joel raised his flask in mock salute. "Cheers to that." A familiar low click interrupted them. Thrall's approach. Eluat drifted politely aside as the instructor stepped closer, his datapad tucked under one arm. "Lieutenant Harker," Thrall said, "you were requested for a curriculum consult next cycle. I submitted your name to the board myself." Joel blinked. "You want me to teach it?" "I want you to survive the next generation of smug omnivores who think nutritional tablets count as preparation." Joel tilted his head. "Thought you didn't believe in opportunists." "I still don't," Thrall replied, "but I now accept that your species isn't one." There was a pause between them. Thrall's gaze dropped to the knife. "That was carved by my own hand. First time since my hatchling rights." Joel blinked once. That explained the balance. It had been made with care. "Thank you," he said quietly. Thrall shifted. "The course is over. But some truths endure." "Such as?" "You adapt under pressure. You endure with methods others find obscene. You consume what others won't." Joel nodded slowly. "We're not always proud of it." "No, but it keeps you alive." Thrall leaned in slightly. "Never forget, evolution rewards the one who doesn't flinch when the rest look away." With that, he turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving Joel with the faintest trace of warmth in his chest and the memory of bones cracking clean under frostbitten skies. 2 months passed. Joel took leave and returned to Earth, briefly, for medical evaluation and debriefing. The scans showed minor malnutrition and ligament stress from the final week on Threxus 9, but no permanent damage. The blister on his foot had healed with time and some ointment. He still favored his left leg in cold weather. When asked by Earthside analysts what the hardest part of the course had been, he didn't mention the hunger or the cold. He said, "Waiting." "Waiting?" the analyst repeated, confused. "Yeah, waiting to be useful." They didn't understand it, but they logged it anyway. He rejoined the fleet in orbit over Arcturus Prime, assigned to a cross-species diplomatic team. The second summit meeting he attended included representatives from 12 systems and a menu crafted by an interspecies catering coalition. Joel passed on the gel squares and universal protein puffs. Instead, he found a back corner table set up by a curious reptilian chef from the Nalari delegation, who offered flame, seared, root-wrapped fish, and pickled game bird. Joel nodded approvingly. "Do you consume muscle tissues as a regular behavior?" the chef asked, watching him curiously. Joel shrugged. "When the alternatives are lichen soup and vacuum bars? Absolutely." "Remarkable," the chef whispered. "A full stomach and working teeth. The other species always boil." Joel held up a strip of cured meat from his own travel pouch. "Want to try something Earth-style?" The chef hesitated, then accepted the piece with ceremonial reverence. One nibble later, his eyes went wide. "I must acquire the recipe." "Start with hunger," Joel said, "and fire. Everything else is seasoning." That drew a laugh from 3 other delegates nearby, including one from a moss-breather species who had once fainted at the smell of roasted fat. The world was changing, slowly, and Joel's story of hunger and bone, of fat and flame, was already becoming its own strange kind of legend. Back aboard his shuttle that evening, Joel pulled the bone knife from his travel pack and turned it slowly in the dim cabin light. The engraving caught his eye again. Respect earned, not assumed. He set it beside his bed, beside the drawing Shren had given him, and the fire striker from Xerok. Across the galaxy, cadets would soon learn how to set a trap, how to render fat, how to field dress a carcass without contaminating the muscle tissue. Not because it was pretty, not because it was ideal, because sometimes survival isn't elegant. Sometimes it's just licking your fingers clean after everyone else has collapsed. Joel didn't romanticize it. He just understood it. And now, so did they.